I'm thrilled to welcome you all here. I'm Tim Richter. I lead the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, and thrilled to welcome you to this session for a fireside chat with Member of Parliament Scott Aitchison, who's the Member of Parliament for Parry Sound, Muskoka, and the Conservative housing critic. Just real quick, I'll do as we always do. I want to just start with a land acknowledgement to say that we acknowledge we're on the traditional and unceded territory and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. So thank you all very much again for coming. Thank you, Scott, for joining us. Why don't we just, maybe what we'll do is we'll just start off. I'll get Scott to introduce himself. We're going to have a chat, he and I, for about half an hour or so. We've only got an hour for this session, so I'll ask Scott a question or two for the next half hour or so, and then we'll open it up and other folks can ask Scott questions. So I would remind you, this isn't the House of Commons, so, no shouting. So Scott, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about yourself and your job as a housing critic.
Thank you. Well, listen, thank you for having me, Tim, and thank you all for being here. I understand that this is the largest conference you've had. That's both heartwarming and alarming at the same time. The fact that it needs to be that big. Tim is quite correct. I'm the Member of Parliament for Parry Sound, Muskoka. Before getting elected 5 years ago, I was the mayor of Huntsville, and before that I was the deputy mayor of that, and before that I was just a lowly councillor. But I first got elected to my local council at the age of 21. I was literally a kid, and I'll tell you honestly, I full disclosure, I didn't know anything. I learned a lot on the job very quickly. But it wasn't really until a little bit later in my career when I became the mayor that I really started to understand the housing need that existed in my community. We talked a lot about housing programs at what the upper tier level of government was, and I thought, oh, that's good. They're taking care of that. That's all managed. I'll focus on my committee, and I didn't know what I didn't know. But it was when I became mayor that I started to really understand the hidden homelessness that existed in smaller communities like Huntsville and Bracebridge and Gravenhurst, and the more I dug into it, the more political oxygen we were able to give this issue and raise awareness, and also invest more money into helping to solve the problem. And then fast forward to 2019, when the opportunity presented itself to run federally. I dreamt about maybe being a federal member of Parliament when I was a kid. But I'd really stopped thinking about it because, we tend to keep our members of Parliament in our area for a long, long time. And I really loved being the mayor. I really enjoyed it, and I was really, really focused on doing that. But housing was really the key issue for me that I thought, well, as I watch what the federal government's doing now, it feels very much like their housing programs are focused on large cities, and they're kind of skipping over these small and rural communities, and that's not fair. And so I thought, well, this is probably the one issue that maybe I could make a difference on at the national level. And so I also was as a candidate for the leadership of our party. I came dead last in that race, but also ran a very good race. It was universally seen as a dignified, very policy focused race. But we launched the whole campaign on the issue of housing. That was my number one topic and the number one policy issue. I think I may be the first member of Parliament to use language like YIMBY and NIMBY in the House of Commons, which I think is a bit of a badge of honor. At any rate, so that's kind of my trajectory. I've been in public life pretty much my whole life, and housing has really become my primary passion in public life, and so I'm thrilled to be here to talk to you guys about housing and homelessness, and what we can do working together to end it.
Great. So you've been working on housing and housing policy for a long time. You were talking about it a bit in terms of what your community. If you've crisscrossed the country now. You've talked to lots of MPs, lots of experts, lots of mayors and others. So what do you hearing at the door? What are you hearing about housing, about homelessness when you're talking to folks?
I'm hearing people talk about it more. I was saying to Tim a little earlier that in my own experience, I didn't think a lot about housing and homelessness because it was a little bit invisible, I guess, in our communities, and I find that people, they don't know what they don't know, and but now they know. Like I feel like this country has woken up to, I think, the most pressing issue of our era. And more people are aware of it, but they don't understand. They don't understand, market housing or affordable housing. They don't understand the continuum, maybe necessarily, but they do understand that it's too expensive to buy a house. It's hard to find a place to rent, and they are completely perplexed why there are more and more people living in tents in our parks across the country in communities large and small. They're frustrated by that. They know that we need to do something about it, but a lot of them don't really know what to do. And so I would say that it's very important that it's part of the consciousness of our society now. People are aware. They get it. They know we need to do something.
Yeah, I'm curious at what your ideas on that something look like. Like we're doing some polling now, and one of the things that we keep hearing from Canadians is what you're saying, that they're looking for a solution. They see homelessness as one of these issues where they want a compassion. Like 80% of people are saying they want a compassionate kind of housing focused response. So I'm curious on the housing side. We'll talk about homelessness in a minute, but on the housing side, what would a conservative housing policy look like?
Yeah, and I think it's important. I think everyone in this room understands that they're not really separate issues. They're all very much interconnected. Like the housing continuum is all very connected, and so to speak about any part of that housing continuum has impacts on the rest of it. But I'll start with the cost of housing, generally speaking. I've as you said, I've crisscrossed the country, and when we add up, and I talk to people about this, when we add up the cost to build a home, whether it's multifamily or a single detached home, whatever it might be, when we add up all the costs of a home in this country, nobody makes more money on it than government. Government is the most expensive part of the process, whether that's, the local development approvals process, development charges, inspection fees. If it's a home that's being sold, there's like land transfer tax, and in the city of Toronto, it's double the land transfer tax. There's HST on the construction of so much stuff. The average is about 33% of the cost of every home is government. And so that is driving the cost of the home overall up. We've also dramatically increased demand for housing over the last couple of years with taking all the guardrails on managing the numbers of people coming into the country. So we've dramatically spiked the demand for housing, and then over decades, we have systematically constrained supply with ever more oppressive zoning bylaws and rules and regulations, and people in their neighborhood don't like change, and so they resist it no matter what it is, even if they don't entirely understand it. And so we've systematically, over the last 30, 40 years, made it more difficult to build and more expensive to get things going into that process. So I would say that the most important thing that we need to do as government is we need real leadership at the federal level to make sure that all levels of government, because we're all involved in housing. Lots of people try to tell, housing is provincial, housing's this. All levels of government are involved in this and need to be involved in it. And I think that one of the most important things at the federal level is real, true leadership to make sure that we're all heading in the same direction and we're all doing, the same kind of work. And I'll give you an example of one of the frustrating things that I see is I cite the Housing Accelerator Fund. This is one of the $4 billion programs that the federal government's come up with to give municipalities based on some agreements to do certain things. One of the key themes seems to be permitting fourplexes, like 4 units as of right in any residential zone. And it's a lot of money to help get housing built faster. But they get that money, and then you see cities increasing their development charges, which makes it even more expensive. And so we're working at cross purposes here, right? We have a federal government doing things, but then you have, local governments that, aren't on the same track. And so that requires leadership for us all to be heading in the same direction. And I think that we need to dramatically reduce the cost to build in this country. And I think overall, if we're able to overall decrease the cost to build, we'll get more built, and people will have more access to homes all along that continuum. And so that's a big thing. And so we've just announced as a party that if we do form government, there used to be a GST rebate on your first home up to $450,000. That's never been indexed. I'm sure everybody knows that you'd be hard pressed to find any home that got built in the last 5 years. It's less than $450,000. So we've increased that number. We would increase that number. But we would also make sure that we're targeting federal investments with municipalities in infrastructure, because we do know that cities need infrastructure resources. They are cash strapped in this area, but we need to make sure that those infrastructure investments are targeted and based on real results, not just promises, not just hopes and dreams, and not just photo ops, but real serious results. Whether that is clearly demonstrating that lands around things like transit infrastructure are already upzoned and ready to go before that transit station is open, for example. Whether that's partnering with municipalities on replacement of aging infrastructure and assisting them not just to replace it, but to upgrade it as well based on higher densities in some of these communities. There's lots of ways that the federal government can make very targeted and very specific investments, and they can do that and make a real difference on this issue. But it requires that leadership to make sure we're all heading in the same direction.
Well, I'm encouraged to hear you talk about federal leadership, and I guess I want to ask a couple of follow-up questions on the GST. So, on the face of it, I think cutting the GST on new housing makes tons of sense. But one of the things that I'm worried about is, in order to pay for the GST cut, your leader's talking about cutting in other transfers to provinces, some of which would create affordable housing. And what I think our audience and the people we're serving, there's a lot of many, if not all, many, will probably never live in market housing or may not live in market housing, and we need supportive and deeply affordable housing. So I guess it's a question and a comment. The comment is yes, the GST cut makes sense, but it shouldn't come at the expense of, you're almost robbing the poor to pay the rich. It's an upward wealth transfer. And sort of the other piece of it is tied to your comment about municipalities. When the federal government cut the GST on rental housing, we saw a lot of municipalities simply filling that space with new development charges. So how do you prevent that from happening?
Yeah. Two amazing questions. And I agree that the leader did speak about specifically this Housing Accelerator Fund as an example. I know, and the leader knows, that we actually need very targeted investment in supportive and social housing in this country. Canada has the lowest rate of social and supportive housing of any G7 nation. It probably should be double what it is. And instead of spending money, giving that money to cities that are just increasing charges elsewhere, we think that it's important to make sure that targeted investment is made where federal dollars should be going, right? We shouldn't be subsidizing the market so much. We should be focused on making sure that those resources go where they need to go, and where it has to be government. And so cutting programs that I think are a waste and not really having the desired impact, and it will help pay for this. We've done some costing on this, and it appears as though it costs about $4.5 billion, which is right about the exact same amount as that Housing Accelerator Fund. And so that leaves lots of room to make sure that we're focusing resources where they need to go, on social and supportive housing, but also on the infrastructure needs that municipalities have, and so we're able to do both. And frankly, you know, the GST was never meant to be charged on the basic necessities of life. You don't pay for the GST on groceries, on real food. And so we call housing a human right, and it's pretty fundamental to our lives. And we charge tax on housing in this country at kind of the same rate we do on cigarettes and booze. That is fundamentally wrong, and it's something we must change.
How would you keep cities from taking that space back?
Yeah, it would be all. We would do it by making sure that the resources that are given to cities are tied to results, as opposed to. Well, I'll give you an example. The Housing Accelerator Fund, they did these agreements. They're going to be paid out in 4 years, so they didn't give all $4 billion at once, thankfully. But there was no wording in their agreements with these cities about keeping development charges and keeping their costs stable. Now there's a whole new fund, this infrastructure fund that they've got, that they haven't started rolling out that money, and the minister said, well, we're going to use that fund. And so they've signaled to municipalities that this next round of funding is coming out, and it's going to be tied to your development charges. So they're scrambling to increase them before that money comes out. This is my point about an absence of leadership and getting everybody on the same page, heading in the same direction. We're not making it any cheaper, but there's a lot of really nice photo ops, and that's not working.
Okay. Good. I'm good to hear. I'm good to hear comments on federal leadership and commitment to social housing. I think I mentioned we're recording this, right? Yeah. Okay. Good.
I assume I'm always being recorded.
I might hold you to that. I'm curious then. So I think we agree homelessness, is a housing issue. But I'm really interested in hearing a bit about your thoughts on a conservative housing policy or homelessness policy if the federal government is to take a leadership role on housing. So what would a conservative homelessness policy look like? And I'm particularly interested in as well about encampments, because I'll be honest, I hear a lot of rhetoric about not necessarily from your party, but your colleagues, about forced treatment, those sorts of things that we, certainly folks in this room, would know are ineffective and hurtful in the long term. So I'm really curious about what would a conservative homelessness policy look like, and how would you approach things like encampments?
Thank you for the question. First, I would be sure not to conflate encampments with addictions completely. I mean, I think that we all know that there are people suffering with addictions that are living in encampments, but there are a lot of people that aren't suffering with addictions that are living in encampments. We'll have a little more to say about this as we roll out our platform and some more policies. But more broadly speaking, I kind of said this already, that we will make sure that federal resources are targeted where they need to be, and that it will making sure that we're investing where we need to invest in social and supportive housing. But that is also connected to the addictions issue. I mean, we want to make sure that the right investments are being made there and sufficient investments are being made there to help people. And so that's a part of this issue. But there's an awful lot of people that are living in encampments right now that don't have addictions problems. They need a home, and so part of it is bringing down the cost of this. Part of it is working with the municipalities and provinces, frankly, to make the investments we need to make in that social and supportive housing, but also reduce the cost overall of the entire continuum, and making sure that as the federal government reduces things like its sales tax on the construction of homes, that provinces meet us and do the same thing, and that cities are also not trying to gobble up extra fees to make it more expensive. So targeted investments and overall reducing the amount of government charges and fees on all homes.
Yeah. So
except for those ones over $1 million.
Yeah. Okay. So
So we're not going to subsidize mansions.
good. Well, good to hear. So one of the you're sort of touching on this a little bit. A lot of folks in our audience or work for municipal government. You worked in municipal government. Now you're in obviously in Parliament. So what do you see as the role of each level of government in homelessness or in housing?
Yeah, I can start with the federal level. Obviously, I've started to talk about. I think it's important for the federal level of government to do what a conservative government would do, and that would be, really targeted investments, but also real leadership and coordinating this amongst levels of government. The provincial government, all provincial governments have an important role to play here as well. In part because they're so tied to municipalities. I mean, municipalities get their authority and their processes are all governed by the provinces. So the provinces can change a lot of how municipal development approvals process works or doesn't work. They can streamline that pretty dramatically. They also make substantial investments in housing, affordable housing, to social and supportive housing. And I think it's important to partner those resources and make sure that we're targeting those and making sure that we're magnifying the federal investment as much as possible. But it's safe to say that municipalities are on the front lines of housing, and particularly on the housing crisis. I think it's important to acknowledge that municipalities have been downloaded lots of services that the property tax base was never designed to pay for. And that's part of the problem that we have right now. And so, it's important for other levels of government to meet municipalities where they are, recognizing that they do have massive infrastructure needs. Cities are responsible for about 70% of the infrastructure in this country and have about 10% of the taxation powers. And the provinces keep downloading stuff to them that they really don't have the resources to pay for. So that's why I think that targeted federal investments in infrastructure and supports for municipality are important, but they must be based on real tangible results and real commitments to keeping the cost down, speeding up that process, and getting more homes built. And so every level of government is involved, and every level of government is important. But that's why I think it's important for people to know that a federal conservative government would be actively engaged in this issue. We would provide real leadership, and resources at the federal level would be very, very targeted.
So speaking of targeted resources, I want to get back to the homelessness policy question. And a lot of the communities we work with are, receive Reaching Home funding. They'll receive some of this new funding out of encampments, veteran homelessness program. I think your leaders made no secret of his interest in, in not necessarily, well, I don't know if he said the words austerity, but I would expect with a conservative government, we're looking at a more conservative government. So what would the future of those programs look like under a conservative government?
Yeah, I don't know. There might be changes to some of these programs. There might be whole new programs. And obviously we haven't rolled out an entire platform on these various different programs. But again, I come back to, some programs are fantastic. I mean, there are some things that the CMHC is doing that are great, and making, in terms of a huge, broad swath of the spectrum of housing, affordable financing, for example, to make multi-unit developments with a certain percentage of the units in the buildings being affordable, definable affordable rents. You can't make those things happen without math adding up. And so there's a couple of programs that the CMHC runs like that I think are great and probably need to be enhanced. We also talk very specifically about not waiting for 9-10 years for the bureaucracy to decide that a piece of federal land is surplus to their needs. On day one, we would order them to make 15% of properties available and do the analysis to, get them out there. I was visiting Mike Hurley, the mayor of Burnaby, and he told me the story of this post office It was an old post office built in 1963. It was in pretty rough shape. It was close to a SkyTrain station, and the city was actively working with the post office to try to get that property because it was surrounded by all kinds of new construction, new residential. There was a church right across the street that had done a deal with a developer, and they built a new church in the podium of the building and then housing above. So it's a great kind of redevelopment, and obviously made a lot of sense in terms of the transit infrastructure. They badgered the post office for quite some time to get this building, and the response that came back was this sort of ridiculous statement like it's not surplus. But clearly it's not being used to its highest and best use, which is a planning term that I'm sure many of you have heard. These are the kinds of opportunities that we have to capitalize on, these opportunities that exist, and we would make these properties available right away. Whether you're dealing with Canada Lands Corporation, that they understand how this system works really well. There's a huge demand for it, and so that's another thing that we would be doing to make sure that we're getting the units that we need. I think it's also important to acknowledge that how problems are solved in different parts of the country may vary a little bit. All too often, the sort of one size fits all program that Ottawa presents might make sense in one community, but might be completely harmful in another community. And so I think that's the other important thing about this, and that's, I think, the importance of federal leadership here is to make sure that we're working with regions to make sure that what we're doing is assisting them appropriately.
Okay, we're going to open it up for questions here in a second. We'll take turns, get folks to put their hand up, and we'll point you out. But I'm going to ask you one more question. We'll give folks to think about it. We've got somebody enthusiastic in the back. So the elephant in the room is I think that folks in our sector are a bit nervous about the prospect of a Conservative government, right? And they would take an answer like that. You don't know the future of the Reaching Home program is. I think it's understandable, but at this point would necessarily make people a little nervous. What would you say to people in the room who would be understandably a little nervous about what a Conservative government would look like?
I would say that's maybe fair based on maybe some of the historical context of dealing with previous Conservative governments. But I would also reassure you that we are serious about this. That when Pierre and I both talk about housing, we talk about it in the context of a basic human necessity. You can talk about the housing crisis in our country, the homelessness situation, from the perspective of the moral failing it is in our society that this is going on. You can talk about it in the context of the economic disaster that it's causing to our country as well. I think that it's important that you know that Conservatives see this as not just an economic issue, but a moral issue as well, and that in a country that is as rich as Canada, this is one of the richest societies in the history of the world, and we can fix this, and we have to fix it, and you will have in a Conservative government, a government that's completely committed, not just to talking points, but to real results, very focused and targeted investments to make sure that we're lifting people up and helping people not just get a safe bed, but to thrive and achieve whatever their dreams might be. That's our mission, and I think that you'll enjoy working with a Conservative government, to be honest with you, because we're very committed to this. It's pretty much core to our whole message.
All right, I'm going to hold you to that. It's recorded. You're going to enjoy working with the Conservative. Okay, I see there's folks with a question.
I may stand for this.
Yeah, gentleman in the back. There you go. Fire away.
I'm the deputy mayor of Aitchison here, Cochrane. Interesting you say about half, because I got $14.7 million from that, and I didn't increase fees and charges. I put them into development incentives, and for the first time in a decade, we're actually seeing the missing middle be addressed by implementation of building apartment buildings. So that allows me to get social workers, nurses, and teachers here. So if you're going to take out the half, what are you going to replace it with other than infrastructure? Because infrastructure is incredibly important, but as you mentioned, you were one of the people who actually addressed NIMBYism. The half has allowed us to actually tackle that for the first time. So without that kind of funding and the incentive to remove and change your zoning bylaws, are you guys going to have another program to really push us to do that?
Well, I'll say this, that I'm glad that you've done what you've done with your funding, because there's way too many other examples where that hasn't happened. And I would also say this, that infrastructure takes the form of a lot more than just subway trains. And so I know that you have infrastructure needs in your community as well. And so there will be very targeted programs. I call them infrastructure programs, but infrastructure is a pretty wide range of needs that exist in communities, whether it's a sewer pipe or a bus or housing. It's all connected. And so I couldn't give you a name of a program, but you will have a partner for sure.
Excellent. One more question. We haven't, you were a former mayor, and we're talking about the municipal funding issue. We haven't changed that since 1848. Would a conservative government be prepared to sit down and talk about how to properly fund municipalities in the 21st century?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an important conversation that we have to have with provinces as well, frankly, because it's the provinces that have been downloading stuff to municipalities that they shouldn't have. So yeah, I think I certainly am interested in that conversation. I was certainly interested when I was a mayor as well, and I continue to be interested in that conversation. So yeah.
All right, he snuck in a twofer there. But we'll ask you to keep it to one. This lady on the side.
Hi, mine's a one. I work for an organization in British Columbia that supports people across the entire continuum, from encampments to market housing. So I want to come back to the reaching home question, because it's a big source of anxiety. We support enough people to fill a large encampment if some of those reaching home dollars go away. And so you mentioned that you're not sure what would happen with that, and you'd like to focus on programs that work. I'm just wondering if you have a sense in how you might evaluate that, because I understand that some CMHC reports have said they don't have, proof of something working. For me, if we support 200 people, some of them over 10 years, across several federal governments, that to me is proof. And so I asked this question in good faith, because I understand that it was under a conservative government that Housing First was first run as a concept. So I'm just really hopeful that should there be a conservative government moving forward, that will continue to be a commitment. And I kind of want to understand a little bit better where you would stand on that.
Yeah, no, and that's a great question too. And Reaching Home is a great example of a program that we would look at very carefully to see if it is working or if it's not. And I think, there are lots of examples out there where those resources have been put to very good use, and it is working. When I talk about getting rid of programs that don't make any sense, I'm talking about programs like that Housing Accelerator Fund. That there's might be one example where it's worked the way it's supposed to, but generally is not. Those targeted resources that I'm talking about are specifically related to programs that you're working in. This is where public money must go, because it's not a solution the market can provide for us. So the analysis will be done on all the programs, obviously, and make sure that those federal resources are focused where they need to be focused. That's
All right. There's a few questions. We'll start in the back, then we'll come to you, and then lady in the middle. Go ahead, Ray. There's plenty, yeah.
Thanks for being here, Scott. We truly appreciate it. Ray Sullivan from CHA.
Good to see you again.
Association. You cited the fact that Canada has the lowest rate of community housing in G7 and OECD, which should probably double that. How will a conservative government support developing new nonprofit and co-op homes?
Again, it's a great question, and again, I come back to targeted investments, partnering with different agencies that are currently on the front lines of this issue, working with local municipalities, regional agencies, and provinces as well. Obviously, there are a lot more people out there that have expertise in getting this done versus the federal government. And so, making sure that we're partnering with people that know how to get the job done and can get it done, that's how we would do it.
And Stephen.
Yes, hi. I work here in Ottawa with Options Housing as a peer support worker with the Housing First team. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, how would a conservative government work to lower rents that are quite honestly way too high, so that we can as on our Housing First team find more housing for the people that we're trying to house?
Yeah. Great question. So part of this is a supply and demand issue, but the simple supply and demand equation, I don't think will be enough to solve the issue. And so targeted investments in affordable housing are going to be really important as well. I actually think that the move to eliminate the GST on purpose-built rentals was a really smart one. Making federal lands available in a number of different contexts, partnered with affordable financing, can ensure that we get more affordable units built into buildings as they get built. We need a massive investment in this, and we need this. We need to make sure that as I said, we're targeting those federal dollars, partnering them with other agencies, with private sector as well in some cases. There's lots of examples out there where the private sector, in partnership with different levels of government, have been able to build beautiful buildings and make 20 or 30% of the units affordable, and some even deeply affordable. And so that's the kind of partnership that I think we need to be doing a lot more of. And if you add up the cost of government and land, you're getting pretty close in a lot of cases to 50% of the cost of building. So if you can reduce those costs, you can make an awful lot of affordable housing available.
So then what would a government do, and I'll use the example that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of about developers in Montreal who say, I'd rather pay the fine than make some of my units affordable for people on lower incomes. What would you do in a case like that as a government?
Well, I'm not suggesting that the federal government would impose something like inclusionary zoning across the country. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that we would work with the private sector, public sector, community agencies that are involved in this already to make it feasible to get these units built. That's what we would do. I wouldn't tell every single builder that you have to have 20% of the units are affordable. I don't think that that's practical. And it's probably not constitutional for the federal government to do that either.
Okay. Purple shirt, orange shirt, lady with their hand up, the black shirt, and fellow with the green hoodie in the back. Go ahead.
Thank you. So you mentioned development charges and the limited funding power of municipalities. Given that, how would you or the Conservative Party support municipalities to increase housing development and infrastructure, knowing that the ability to raise funds for those are extremely limited? And with regards to the announcement this week with the Conservative Party wanting to abolish the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund and the Housing Accelerator Fund, I'm curious to hear how you guys would support municipalities in actually building housing development and infrastructure.
I think I've said this a few times already, but targeted investments based on results, not on promises, but there'd be targeted investments in infrastructure based on results. So if you want me to give you some more examples for that, I can do that. But let's take the city of Toronto. They're building the Eglinton Crosstown. They've built this whole network. It's one of the largest public infrastructure projects in the history of the country, and the stations are all along this line, all around it. It's pretty much single-family residential all the way around. They haven't upzoned anything. And so what we're saying is that a federal government wouldn't give money to those projects unless things were upzoned already before they made that investment, whether that's on transit infrastructure, whether that's on aging wastewater pipes, for example. The infrastructure in the ground in our country is very old, and it's in bad shape. And so there's lots of examples all across this country where I know cities need to replace a sewer pipe or a water pipe. And so this could be an example where a federal government could come along and say, we'll help pay to replace that pipe, but we want to make it a bigger pipe, and we want you to upzone the land around that pipe to make sure we can have higher density in this community. So those are just two examples of targeted investments that municipalities have to get their part of the job done first before that investment is made. And so, I mean, I could probably go on with all kinds more examples, but sorry, you don't.
Oh, I was just saying, isn't that already what the Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund plans to do?
They say it will do that, but it's not doing anything right now. It's not doing anything right now because they've already told municipalities after they got their housing accelerator funding deals done, they've now said, oh, and this next fund will be about keeping your development charges low. And so cities are scrambling to increase them before they get into that wave. And so this is my point about all levels of government working together and heading in the same direction. We don't solve any problems if the federal government gives money, reduces costs, but then the municipalities make more costs. And so I'm just saying resources are scarce, they have to be very targeted, and they have to be based on results. That's what we do.
Go ahead.
From Winnipeg, and the housing center funding there so far has not led to any increased development costs. So we're building, for example, a $3.6 million project, and I'm expecting permitting to be well under 10%, if not under 5%. So just curious about the critique of the Housing Accelerator Fund, and if those of us in the middle right now of planning, so I have $36 million of builds in progress. We're trying to get to 1,000 new units over the next 10 years. Are you saying that your government would immediately kind of cease the Housing Accelerator Fund? And how does that sit with you when 5 of your own colleagues across Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, and New Brunswick have written in support of Housing Accelerator Fund projects, recognizing the impact it's going to have in their constituency? Because as a long-term planning organization, we're building a sober building, we're building a seniors assisted living, we're building a medical step-down unit. So like we need to know that we can, would you rescind Housing Accelerator Fund commitments that have been made? And how do we continue to not get slowed down by a change in government in the process of building the housing that's needed?
Are you saying that your agency is using Housing Accelerator funding to build buildings?
Yes.
You are, in Winnipeg, okay? And so is it a multi-year commitment, or has the city made a commitment to give you that money to do that?
Correct.
Okay. So.
And has instituted a nonprofit concierge that
Okay.
helps us skip zoning lines and skip permitting lines so that social, affordable, deeply affordable social supportive housing can be advanced quicker.
And that might be an example that we can help roll out to other municipalities across the country, because doing things like that, I think, are very important. So the answer to your question about Housing Accelerator specifically, yes, we would cancel it. There will be other targeted investments based on what you're talking about, what you're building. It wouldn't be Housing Accelerator Fund. Maybe it'd be a different fund. I'm not exactly sure, what the fund would be called, but those targeted investments would be not through the Housing Accelerator Fund. And
Cancel committed dollars.
You're saying committed dollars. Are you telling me that the city has committed multi-year dollars to one project?
No, but like we know right now this much is coming to our city, and so as a community of practice together, we're saying this is the next priority project, right? We're trying to get projects in the door for prioritization. And I think it's interesting because this is partnered with your leaders' critique of immigration. One of the challenges is that we're not bringing in enough immigration people with the capacity to build, right? So building in Winnipeg is actually more expensive than building in Toronto because there's better competition in Toronto to drive down the construction costs and RFP dollars, whereas in Winnipeg it's like you've got like 5 players in the sandbox.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to somebody else, but the answer to your question quite simply is yes, we will cancel the Housing Accelerator Fund. Full stop. We will cancel it because too much of it is being used by cities that are actually increasing the cost. So I can give you countless examples. The City of Toronto just increased their development charges by 42% after getting $471 million. The City of Vaughan just increased theirs. The City of Hamilton just increased theirs. Ottawa just increased theirs. It's not working. So maybe it's working in your context. We'll find different ways to help the programs that you're working on, but the Housing Accelerator Fund will be gone. And to my colleagues that actually wrote letters because their municipalities said, well, we didn't get any money, can you send a letter? There's no shortage of MPs that write letters on behalf of their municipality. They regret writing those letters now because they know full well that we don't support this program. They all know the importance of the federal government being a partner with municipalities, though, and that partnership will change.
All right. Lady back. Yep.
I applaud those municipalities that have come to the table and helped groups. Our municipality absolutely refuses to do anything in regard to housing. They say that's not their jurisdiction and that they're totally out of housing. So I'm glad to hear that you say that you're going to have leadership from the top and bring all the players to the table, and that all levels of government will be working together on housing, because it is a crisis. And I've been around a long time, since the 90s when the feds pulled out social housing. And so our program is old and aging, and we are an affordable housing program now. We are not low income, we are not RGI, because we can't be, to be able to be self-sustaining. So I'm wondering what your government will do to help support those programs that have been around for 30, 40, 50 years, providing affordable housing in regard to upgrading their portfolios or doing something to help us in regard to operations.
That's a great, it's a great question, and I think it's important that that we get that the housing stock in this country is also really old and needs massive investment. And so I don't know what that program would look like, but I would acknowledge to you, yes, that we need to be making investment in fixing up housing and making sure that people aren't getting kicked out of their home because it needs to be upgraded either, right? And so I don't know what that program would look like, but I'm glad you raised it, because it's something that we talk about, that we need to make sure that we're investing in the existing stock that's failing now.
And green sweater, then Mark, Anita, John, and wait, you. Yeah, because I saw your hand up earlier. Sorry. Start with the green sweater.
Hi, Scott. I'm from your home riding in Parry Sound.
Okay.
Glad to see you here. So, over the course of the last couple of days, we hear the word affordable. What does that mean to you in a conservative government? Because, as we know, everything has gone up. Nothing is affordable anymore.
Yeah.
And in our town, Parry Sound, working for the DSAP, every day I'm dealing with seniors, families, who are on a fixed income. That's about the only thing that hasn't gone up.
Yeah. Yeah. Incomes have not gone up. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what does affordable mean to a conservative government? And how would you make it affordable for the ones who are, a lot of seniors, again, are on fixed incomes, that, they are really choosing between food and they're
Yeah, absolutely.
all that sort of stuff. So
Well, listen, first of all, thanks for your work on the DSAP. That's important. You're right. Using the word affordable, there's two different definitions in this country of what is affordable. We should probably have one. That's probably a first start. And in truth, I probably should be using the word attainable. What's attainable? What's attainable for you and me are very different, maybe, right? And so this is a problem with some of the language that we use around housing. Is I think that we get a little loose with it, and we're not being very specific. And so I would say that again, the whole spectrum we're talking about here, right? What's defined as affordable in this context is important. What's defined as affordable in this context? What's attainable in this context? They're all important. And doing the analysis to make sure that we're making the investments to make sure that everyone has a home in this country, it'll be important to be making sure that those targeted investments are being targeted to the right type of housing based on the need that exists. And so, I've met with the DSAB. It's an amazing agency that has a remarkably good handle on what the need is. So you tell me what that targeted investment needs to look like. Yeah, sure you can. Because I know that and we're not going to solve it in a year. We're not. But we're going to start, and we're going to make the investments that we know that people on the ground, on the front lines of this, know what needs to be done. So we'll work with you.
All right. So we've got a couple. I think Mark, you were next. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to raise the issue of the loss of affordable housing that's going on across the country. I think there are people in this room who would have the stats on that, but we're losing more than we're building. That would seem to be an issue that a future Conservative government could really lock into with targeted investments that you've been talking about. So I wonder if you have some thoughts on that, Scott. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and it's a completely factual statement. We are losing more affordable or attainable homes than we are building right now. And part of the reason for that is because the market is gobbling up, those units. And so it speaks to the importance of making sure that we are making the targeted investments that we need to be making, and working with cities. I'll go back to Burnaby. It's another great example. They have an amazing program in Burnaby, where if a developer is coming along and wants to buy a building and tear it down and build something new, they have obligations to the people that live in that building, and so they have to either, number one, find them a new place, and if they don't want to move from their location, they have to find them a temporary place and then provide them an option for a place in the new building at what they were paying. That's almost unheard of in this country, but they do that in Burnaby. And so there's lots of examples out there how we can protect people that, have something that they can afford and that is suitable for them, in the context of redevelopment and new buildings going up. So there are a lot of examples out there that we can partner with, and Burnaby is a great one. But your point is well made, and I understand it and agree with you.
We'll get back to red in a second, but there's a few just up here, yellow and white.
I appreciate you talking about the housing continuum, but I think I wish you would have talked about where the barriers to housing. So systems right now, there's a big gap with that. They can create stigma for people exiting correctional facilities. They can also create homelessness. Your government's talked about having more workers in healthcare and implementing training and employment programs in correctional facilities. Is there efforts to look at how the housing continuum plays with systems in an effort to reduce homelessness? I appreciate that you talked about infrastructure, but I didn't really see anything to talk about how we can support the most vulnerable people.
Well, and I think that comes with partnering with provincial and municipal agencies that are doing this kind of work now, right? So the federal government is not isn't directly involved in a lot of these kind of programs, but to understand in the context of what you're saying is important, and it sounds like I need to learn more. So.
Well, the federal government does provide funding to the provinces, and in some of the contracts you have with the past, you just say, like we talk about matching dollars often, but we don't talk about outcomes. So.
Well, our whole approach will be based on outcomes, not promises, and it'll be all tied to results and outcomes. So,
Anita, and then you two, and then lady in the back. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, Scott. My name is Anita Khan. I work at United Way, which is based here in Ottawa. I really heard your responses around the need for targeted investments, and I'm curious if you could speak a bit about examples on rural housing and homelessness that you think we can learn from and build on. And of course, thinking of the good work of United Way Simcoe Muskoka through Reaching Home just announced $3.5 million, $2 million for capital, and $1.5 million for services. I think just earlier this week, which is great news for the community. And of course, from the United Way perspective, services are so important to keep people housed. Mm-hmm. And so I'm really curious about what you would see as effective ways to support rural communities.
Thank you for that, and it's a great example actually. The United Way of Simcoe Muskoka is doing some great work. We've had a couple of meetings as well, but again, it really is about partnerships, right? And so the United Way of Simcoe Muskoka, for example, partners with the District of Muskoka, and in the District of Muskoka context, they have a number of programs that I lobbied hard to get going on all kinds of different housing programs along the whole spectrum, really. And so this is, again, where I think federal leadership comes in, that we acknowledge that this is not an issue just in big cities, but it's in smaller communities and rural communities across the country. And we don't know the details, and necessarily, this Ottawa knows best, one size fits all kind of programming doesn't work. And so this is why it's so important for federal leadership and partnership with the people on the front lines in all different communities. And so it's one of the curious things about the Conservative caucus today. It's an awful lot of rural members that understand this and have pointed out to me that rural communities seem to be ignored. in this context, this discussion about housing. So you'll have a lot of sympathetic ears in a Conservative caucus about making sure that we're meeting the needs of all Canadians, not just the ones in big cities.
Okay. John?
That rural piece with reaching home is so important, right? Reaching home and walking.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name's John Hyde. I wear a different hat. I want to talk about. I want to ask a question from a different angle. So, housing is understood, commonly understood as being a public policy issue. And you said a couple things in your preamble. You said two things. One, that housing is a basic necessity. Second, and before that, you said that housing is a human right. So if that's the case, then how will that inform, how will that, the housing being a human right, how will that inform the decision of a Conservative government? And what would that look like? What were the things that the Conservative government do to amplify the notion that housing is a human right in Canada?
Well, I think I've talked already a bit about this, but one of the moves is one of the things that we just announced. If it's a basic necessity, we shouldn't be taxing it at such crazy rates. I mean, I said over and over again that if it is a basic human necessity, then we shouldn't be taxing. You don't pay GST, for example, on real food. You don't pay it on groceries, and so you shouldn't pay it at these crazy rates on housing either. And so fundamentally, that's really the biggest difference in approach that we would take on this is that we need to make these targeted investments. We need to make sure that everybody has a home. We need to make sure that government isn't making all kinds of money off of housing, and we need to partner with various different agencies and that are on the front lines of the entire housing spectrum to make sure that Canadians are provided what they need and have the safe, secure housing that they deserve.
Steve.
Yeah, I'm Steve Doherty. I'm Executive Director of a youth shelter in Northwest Toronto. I have a very quick technical question that we're involved in. Announcements that are being made and commitments that are being made, there's a very good chance that Parliament will be prorogued. Will all that die, or does it continue on, or is it considered a business of the House and it therefore dies of prorogation?
Yeah, if the House is prorogued, legislation stops. But I mean, I don't know if it'll be prorogued, to be honest with you. I mean, speculation about prorogation is almost as rampant in this town right now as when the next election will be. So I don't know if that will actually occur or not. But legislation definitely, what they say, it dies on the order paper, and then it has to be taken up again. So, but I don't know if that's going to happen.
My second question, a bit more involved. So, the past 8 or 9 years, we've had a lot of promises. I'm glad to see that Tim and his group have done a great job in working with Sean Fraser and his group to make some changes, but it took a long time. We had a lot of promises, we had a lot of commitments, we had a lot of funding dollars that were being told were going to be flowed. Long on announcements, short on deliverables. Toronto took us over 1.5 years to get the $90 million for the refugee costs. Over a year to get the refugee costs covered, and it was only a portion. What will be different when the CPC forms the next government?
Yeah, and I say this over and over and over again that these guys, this government has been long on photo ops and promises, but very, very poor on the delivery and the follow-up. They've done some good things. I won't take that away. They've done some good things, but it's like they don't know. They don't realize they should ask a question about whether what they announced actually occurred or not. And so, to me, it's important that a federal government be good managers and operate things properly. And so that's why I say, a Conservative government will make very specific and targeted investments, and it will be based on results, and that's what we're looking for. And that'll be in all areas of federal responsibility. We will focus very much on results and action, and that's how we'll measure the success of everything.
Okay, so we're just at time, and I know promised one question, so we'll get in the back one last question, and then we'll have to wrap. Yeah, you. Yep.
Hi, my name is Jess Daly in Hamilton. It's my understanding that the National Housing Strategy has kind of like two arms. One that's like a land development arm, so CMHC, there's that one, where that develops the land and has the projects to do that kind of thing. And then this other arm is kind of like the people development arm, which is like you think along through the Infrastructure Canada, things like that. We've seen historically that these two arms are not really speaking to each other to ensure that there's something happening or this project of developing people, but there's nowhere to actually go. To other general court, things like that, that say they're not actually matching up. How would conservative government make sure there's direct accountability between these arms?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a series of questions that we've asked a lot about. Making sure that the investments are measurable, and that we are doing the analysis of the results. And I don't know how I would describe how we would do that. I've never actually, been involved in running a federal government, but I've been involved in running other municipalities, for example, and agencies, and making sure you have proper checks and balances in any program that you run, and making sure that you're doing the follow-up questions to make sure that analysis is being done. And I guess that's really how you do it.
Would there be a commitment from the conservative government to ensure that that was like a priority?
I think that's what I've been saying all along. Absolutely.
People that are living outside, for example, but making sure that there's access to housing, all the ways and all the money being spent on it. That seems really important.
I think that's what I've been saying all along.
So that would be a direct priority.
Absolutely.
Because the outcomes that come from this one arm aren't necessarily measured against the outcomes that come from the other.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Great. I know I have a long list of questions, but I can bug them other times. And I do know that there's probably many more. Well, I saw lots of other hands, lots of other questions. But we do got to let you go. Thank you very much for coming. I'll maybe give you a chance if there's anything you wanted to give you the last word, and then we'll set you loose.
Well, I'll say again, thank you, Tim, not just for the opportunity to be here today, but for the work that you and all of you do as well. I talk to Tim a lot. As much as I know about housing and as much as I am passionate about the issue, there's always more to learn. I'll be the first one to admit that, and I think that the importance of dialogue it can't be overstated here. And so, staying in contact with each other, making sure that as things evolve, that we're making sure that we're evolving to address the needs as they come. Let's keep this conversation going and working together. Thanks.
Thank you all.